This cruise started all the way up here in Cape Verde, which is just off the western coast of Africa. And we sailed for about 4.5 days south past the equator right here to the chain transform faults.
All right, so we are approximately here. So we are along the mid-Atlantic ridge. So that is the ridge. It's spreading apart and separating North America and South America from Europe and Africa. So along most of this ridge, we have divergent motion. So that's two plates that are pulling apart from each other. But in some places, the ridge does these little kind of stair-step patterns. And so you have areas where you're pulling apart and you're creating new crust, but in between those ridge areas, you have what are called transform faults or fracture zones. And these regions, you can see that the plates are not pulling apart from each other. They're actually sliding past each other. So if you look at the movement of these two arrows, you can imagine the sliding along that blue line there. So we're at one of these transform faults called the chain transform fault. And we are kind of investigating the oceanic crust here. And so this is a kind of simplified schematic of what the oceanic crust looks like. It's actually a lot more complicated in the transform fault, but this is the basic idea. We have kind of three main rock types. We have this top layer is basalt. It's a very dark volcanic rock. Then we have gabbro. This has the same chemical composition as the basalt, but it's from deeper in the crust, and so it has kind of coarser crystals. And then down below the crust, we get into the mantle. And the mantle is made of peridotite. That's the rock type I study. It's a really beautiful green rock. And because it's so deep beneath the crust, it's really hard to access those mantle rocks. And so these places where you have plate boundaries and these big kind of cracks in the earth give us these really cool opportunities to sample some of that deeper material. And so one of the reasons that we're particularly interested in this transform fault and the kinds of rocks that we're getting at the fault is that we're looking at the deformation. We're looking at how rocks are changing as this movement occurs. So you can imagine you're kind of sliding rocks past each other. You're going to have rocks that are deforming and breaking, and there's a couple different ways that that can happen. So one way that can happen up in this kind of basalt layer, where things are relatively cold, is we get what's called brittle deformation. And so this is where rocks kind of break into pieces. You can imagine if you had like a cold chocolate bar, you could snap that chocolate bar into these kind of angular pieces. And so this is a rock type called breccia. But if you go deeper down into that fault zone, you get to hotter temperatures deeper in the planet, and you enter this region of ductile deformation. So you can imagine if you took that same chocolate bar and you kind of heated it up a little, it might start to become a little more flowy. And so you can get rocks that are actually stretched like silly putty, and you can see mineral grains that are stretched. And so this is a rock type called myelinite that we see a lot in faults. And so our peridotite in these transform faults can turn into this myelinite rock type. So we've been really lucky on this cruise that we found a lot of breccias and a lot of myelinites. So we have a lot of really cool rocks that are going to help us investigate how this process of deformation is happening. And the reason that we care about all of this is that it tells us something about seismicity. So it tells us how earthquakes are forming and propagating. So something we see on this chain transform fault is that we don't have earthquakes occurring kind of equally along the fault. And that's something that's true of transform faults on land as well. So the San Andreas fault is one of the most famous transform faults. And so by looking at transform faults in the ocean that are a little more simple than the ones on land, we can start to understand how earthquakes are occurring. So earthquakes are representing, the rocks are sliding against each other and breaking, they're building up tension and then releasing that tension. And if you're building up tension and having brittle deformation, that's going to be sort of a different process than if you have ductile deformation going on. And so understanding how the rocks are moving against each other, how they're deforming in these fault zones, is going to give us some critical information, hopefully, about how seismicity and earthquakes work in these really interesting plate boundaries.
My name is Noah, and I am one of the res techs on board the ship. That stands for either research technician or resident technician, kind of depending on who you ask. Around the industry, maybe marine technician is more common. My role here is to coordinate the deployment and recovery of scientific instruments that are going into the sea. And in order to achieve success there, when I'm not on the ship, I do have an office component to that job where I am messaging the science party that's coming on board to make sure that their instruments will work with our ship and vice versa, some other considerations, shipping concerns, etc., etc. But at sea, I'm in charge of putting it in the water and doing it safely and making sure that we're all being safe while we're on deck. I have been working as a res tech now for 3.5 years. I don't know if you can say there's a traditional path to get to this area. Mine is one of the non-traditional ones for sure. I do have a master's degree in fisheries biology, but that was from 2011. And since I've only been here 3.5 years, you can do the math. The most recent position I was at before I came to Scripps was as a dive supervisor on a Navy base, where I was running a 35-foot long boat that had a little A-frame in the front and recovering inert mines for practice and training over there. So it was basically field marine operations for 3 years before I came here.
I've been working in oceanography for 19 years now, dredging pretty much the same amount of time, and along with other disciplines like coring and putting moorings in the ocean. Right now we are covering the dredge from the seafloor after we did about a 2-kilometer track line. Hopefully it'll be full of rocks. The dredge basket is sort of a rectangular bucket made of steel with a couple teeth on it, about 3 feet long and a foot wide. Then we weave a chainmail bag onto the back of it so that when we drive across the seafloor, we don't rip it apart and we can collect the rocks.
A-frame in.
Four cool and interesting rocks. Here is a basalt. So the basalt is what we call the mafic, which is a larger part of what we call the oceanic crust. So this is the rock that we find in the upper part of it. And it's directly into contact with seawater. And so because of that, it's cooling really, really rapidly. And so you can see here, if I'm getting close to it, that we don't see a lot of big crystals, but we do see little bubbles, empty bubbles, and on top of it, what's this glass, which means it was cooled down in an instant and formed there the contact gas and was trapping bubble of gases on top on this rock. If this melts, crystallize below, what is happening? This is happening. So you see here, if you can, we have bigger crystals. We don't have the glass, we don't have the bubbles, but we have different degrees of gray. Like for example, you can see all these shiny parts here on this a broken part, and this is what we call a gabbro. So which is exactly the same chemistry as before, but had time to crystallize at depth and to form this type of minerals. Typically what we call pyroxene, plagioclase, which is a bit like translucid here and appear really dark, and the really darkish area here which are oxides, so rich in iron and titanium. And another pretty cool rocks that came from the depth is this one. It doesn't appear much, but this is what we call peridotite, so which is below the oceanic crust, which is not magmatic or volcanic, and it's typically a large part of what Earth is made of. And here you see it's a bit altered. The brown area is like low temperature alteration, but here all the gray is what we call a milonite, and you can see foliation. And what we call foliation is a stretching of minerals because of a deformation. And this is really interesting because this, we know, formed at 30 or 40 kilometer depth. And if we look into it with a microscope, we see a bit of amphibole in it. And amphibole is a mineral with water in it. So that means that in fossil fault, we have seawater coming to 30-40 kilometers during deformation and crystallizing these rocks, which are then exhumed to the surface where we can grab it and study it. And to show you one last really nice rocks, we also have more difficult interpretation for this kind of systems. When you see this rock here, so we have the manganese crust around here, and we have a lot of different colors. The really brownish here is the same one as before. This is low temperature alteration, what we call clay, typically mud. But all around here you see all these veins, which is red-green, and means that these rocks underwent a lot of fluid rock interactions, probably a bit high temperature as well, of systems that we can call hydrothermalisms, which are often occurring near transform fault and the mid-oceanic ridges, and which shows a big history of interaction between the rocks and the seawater, which is what we are interested in. And this was 4 interesting rocks.
Hello, my name is Zach, and this is Renee. We're 2 engineers that work with the Sentry autonomous underwater vehicle over here. It's a 6,000 meter rated underwater robot that's primarily used for mapping the seafloor. We do some other things. We can strap other science instruments to it as well, but it's been in operation for over 15 years now. It's operated out of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts. It's a follow-up successor vehicle to an earlier one named Abe. I can hand it over here to Renee. She can show you some of the bits and pieces of it.
First, let's do a walk around of the vehicle. So what you don't see underneath the skin is there is a huge amount of foam underneath the vehicle, which keeps it buoyant. And inside the foam, we have the main housing, which you can think about as the brains of the vehicle. Down below, we have lots of equipment that's used for vehicle navigation, also produce data products for the scientists, such as mapping, as Zach mentioned. We also have a camera strapped in right here, which I don't think you're quite able to see, but it's there. We also have some cables out here, which we use to charge the batteries and also to download and upload information to and from the vehicle. Some other important aspects of the vehicle is these are thrusters right now, right here. And we typically have a nice wing that's bright and orange over these to help it fly above the seafloor. But these are used to propel the vehicle forward. We have props attached to them when the vehicle is in its full glory. And also actuating these thrusters, we have servo motors that are inside the vehicle that the vehicle uses to drive up, down, forward. Yeah, and so if we keep going around the vehicle, you'll see up top we have a variety of instruments. We have some transducers which we use to communicate with the vehicle when it is in operation. So what's interesting about that is we could be 4,000 meters above the vehicle, but we're still able to talk to it from the ship using these deucers up top. Keep walking around, some more science insight right here. That's called a side scan. It's used to create images of the seafloor to the rear end of the vehicle, and it's pretty much the same on the other side. So let's just walk her back around towards that. To talk about myself a little bit, so I'm a mechanical engineer with the group, and so when I'm out here at sea, what I do is I help to turn around the vehicle, so when it comes up from this extreme environment, I do a full inspection of it and make sure things are in operating condition and do repairs when they're needed. I also work on shore, which I do more typical engineering work, a range of design work, documentation, and the background for myself of how I got to work here is in college I studied mechanical and robotics engineering, and I actually interned with this group when I was a student in college, and when I graduated college, they took me back, which was really awesome.
So kind of following up with Renee there, give a little background of what I do here and then back on shore. I'm more of a software and electrical engineer as opposed to mechanical, but I've been with the group for getting on about 10 years now. So actually now when I come out to sea, I act as more of the group boss, and I'm more of a liaison between science, who we're operating this robot for, and the ship, which we're operating off of, and our team. We sail with 5 people total. So I'm doing less engineering work at sea, it's more managing. But on shore, I'm designing instruments, I'm writing software. At this point, I'm starting to write some proposals with other scientists. And I guess as far as my background goes, I was really interested in computers and electronics, and I grew up by the ocean, and I knew I wanted to stay by the ocean. So to me, it made sense to work on underwater robotics, because then I'd have to probably still be by the ocean. That's worked out so far.
Welcome to the computer lab. This is kind of the home of all like the computer set and the science computer systems on board. Come on over, we can show you some of them. This one here, this is a gravity logger. We are actually measuring the gravity that the ship experiences up here on the ocean surface. This is how we get our bathymetry. Down at the bottom of the boat, there's a gondola which has a variety of sensors that are pointing straight down to the ocean floor. One of them is our EM124, which produces these this multi-beam data. What you can see right now, we have been going just along this track right here, and we've started to go up the side of a seamount, which we are currently mapping just on our transit back home. And over time, as the ship moves forward, we fill in more and more data, just like that.
My name is Iggy. I'm an able-bodied seaman here on the Revelle. What that means is during the day I do a lot of deck work, just keeping everything clean, and then at night I stand a navigational watch. My favorite thing about the job is just the ability to disconnect and just kind of exist in an isolated ocean for a couple of weeks. I've been doing deckhand work now almost 5 years, but sailing altogether about 7. I actually became a bartender first, and then that translated to cruise ships, and then cruise ships translated to research vessels. I learned at a pretty young age that schooling was not for me. Yeah, the camaraderie, it builds quick, especially if you're about this life. I would say there's certain people that can and can't sail, and others those that can sail may or may not fit into the research vessel type of sailing.
Okay. Can I say something?
Yeah, go for it.
So you've seen sailor tattoos, and sailor tattoos have each a meaning. Now, the canary on the shoulder, I believe, is 5,000 miles.
It's a sparrow.
Sparrow, whatever.
It's on the chest.
It's on the chest, whatever. Who cares? Anyway, lots of people care, I'm sorry. But anyway,
I really have one. Oh my God.
What I'm getting at is that Mr. Brandon Ignacio and myself have mutual sparrows, many mutual sparrows.
Well, every Sunday we grill because it's the only thing to look forward to every week. Every day is the same. Hopefully, out here. When things get different, that's when things get complicated and harder. So most of shipboard life is just routine, except for Sundays, in which I get to grill. So as chief engineer, I am responsible for everything that goes on below decks. I graduated from Mass Maritime in 2011, so there's a sort of a 4-year college that you go to become an officer in the U.S. Merchant Marine. And I've been doing this ever since 2012. Started off as a third engineer, in charge of pretty much nothing, but the engine room is the third engineer. It's 8 hours a day. Bumped up to second, and then first assistant engineer, and now I'm the guy in charge of the engineering department. Yeah.
So, as the captain of the ship, or the master is the other term, my job is the overall command of the vessel. So I'm in charge of its safe navigation as the primary, but then managing the entire crew and the operations both in the deck department and the engine department, overseeing all of that. Other responsibilities include working directly with the chief scientists and orchestrating a safe mission for them, and making sure they hit all their scientific goals. Other jobs include, being that direct contact to our home office and the shore, and all of our port planning, coming in and out of port and all of that, dealing with all the paperwork of customs officials, immigration and such. So I got into sailing when I was younger. I grew up around boats, always was really interested in boats. Never really understood I could have a career in working on ships. And then at the end of high school, for me, I had found out about a school in California called the California Maritime Academy, where I could go to college and get a degree on how to drive ships. So I ended up going there, transferred in, and then graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Marine Transportation, as well as with the U.S. Coast Guard's third mate unlimited license. So, although civilian, all the mariners on here are credentialed by the Coast Guard to be able to work on ships. What was unique about my license as the third mate is that I could be a third mate on any size ship in the world. So on most ships, you have your captain, first chief mate, second mate, third mate. So I could be at the third mate level. And so finished with that. And then I had always had an inherent interest in research ships, even though I could work on any type of ship. And I have worked on others, but the research always kind of spoke more to me. And so I immediately came to research vessels after graduating school, but then as well, I've left, went and worked on a container ship, left, worked on another type of research vessel, and then came back to Scripps. And I've been with Scripps since 2016. And during that time, I've moved up from third to second mate to then chief mate. To then in 2022, I got the opportunity to start sailing as captain. So I've been in the captain's role for 3 years now.
I have been working with Scripps for the past 3 years. This is the second maritime job I've worked though, so I've been on ships a total of about 5 years. Our mornings start around 5:30. We serve breakfast, take a little bit of a break, then we come back, serve lunch, another little break, then dinner. We normally get out of here around 6:30. Yeah. Sometimes I really miss land. That's probably like an obvious one, but it's really cool to step outside and be surrounded by like beautiful ocean. But sometimes I really miss like trees and stuff. I would say something I really like about this job is it kind of encompasses like community living. So you're around people all the time, and know, I'm friends with most people on board, and like I don't know, it's just really cool to wake up and be around people that you're close with.